Welcome to our first episode of Historical Theories. Tonight, as it is our first night with this show, we're going to be exploring a few different topics. We don't have anybody that's going to be, that I'm going to be hosting this with tonight, but so no guests or anything. So it's just going to be me and all of you that are in the chat or that are viewing at a later time. And please feel free if you guys got questions, you guys want to dispute something, totally in the comments down below, for sure. And I do apologize for being so late. I'm still getting over being sick. I've actually been sick during this entire vacation. I was supposed to have camping, and well, I've been sick, so it's just been lovely. But I'm feeling a lot better right now, and I almost canceled tonight's show, but I decided now the show must go on. So, without further ado, I'd like to go and just start diving right into what we've got. There's a ton of stuff when it comes to this, to all of these different topics we're going to be covering tonight, as you can see on the screen right now. So the major three we're going to be discussing that are going to be the flood. This is also known as the Great Deluge, Noah's flood, the flood from the Bible. It's got all sorts of different names, right? We know it did happen, though, so I'm going to go over this, and I'll explain why. This one, I'm just going to give out that freebie and say, well, it actually did, because we can show this through all sorts of different means, whether it be geological. You can actually look at different species that have been dispersed and such like that. So, I mean, it's not just migratory. We're seeing certain species and things like this. So like I said, some of the stuff I'm going to ask that you guys go and do a little investigation on your own. I'm going to give you some of the information, and that's going to be the big thing here, is I'm going to give information. If we have others, then we would have conversation, but because we don't have others, it's just going to be, here's information, check it out. So anytime we don't have any guests, just expect that's going to be what it's going to be like. But there's a ton of stuff to go and cover tonight. So I'm going to be hitting things hard and very, very fast. I wouldn't expect the show to probably go any more than probably about 15 minutes at most. So it might go longer. I've been known to talk and talk and talk. So, but let's get right into it. So with the flood, like I said before, you've got the geological factors here. So you can actually take a look at the different layers, different soil layers, and you can actually see there's a lot of differing, you can obviously see the different layers. So just to put it bluntly, so you can see that actually occurred. But you've also got all these other stories, right? You've got it from all over the world. So here's my question about that. If everywhere across, throughout every culture we've got, pretty much every single culture, I'll show you guys a map here in a second of it. If all these cultures are saying the flood they've got a story of the flood, and you're looking back on, timing and all this, and it's all around the exact same time, it's hard to dispute it. Now, you could say, okay, well, different cultures and things like this, they migrate, right? Okay, sure, you can kind of give it that, but not really. But with flooding like that, I mean, we're talking global flooding. That's going to definitely do some damage to land masses and things like this. But you also got to ask yourself, where did the water come from? And then where did it go afterward? Especially as we're now hearing that the mantle itself, underneath our crust, there's a huge ocean, right? There's this huge, massive, just amount of water underneath our crust. So if that's true, well, we have no idea really what's going on underneath our, what's going on underneath our feet. Really, we don't. We have some kind of idea, but we don't. There's all sorts of different reasonings as to why we don't. When they've drilled in certain areas, it gets way too hot. That can come from a lot of different factors. Pressure itself, especially with different kinds of materials and minerals and all this, it can actually cause this. We know this because you can see there's certain areas, near certain mines and things like this. For instance, there was the Russian experiment where they drilled down and they called it the sounds of hell. Okay, I'm not using this in a vain name. The sounds sounded like something you'd see in a horror movie. That where it in the story it took you to hell, right? And it's all these like just painful screams. That's directly what it sounds like. Now that can be caused from all sorts of different things, different gases and things like that. However, nobody's been able to really truly recreate it. And now, I mean, I'm literally out there trying to say, hey, go recreate it with some, gases and things like this. Please do. I'd love to see this as possibility. Go under these types of constraints of how this, where they heard these sounds, and they were continual. Okay, and it was also extremely hot. So I'd love it if somebody could, show that. I mean, we've all heard the sounds of the black hole, and that also sounds very similar to that too. Very just painful screaming, and all is what it almost kind of sounds like. It sounds very, very eerie, and it's very unsettling. But like I said, I have yet to see anybody really recreate that through those exact constraints. But like I said, where did the water come from? That's gonna be the big thing here. Now you've got things like evaporation and things like this, but end of the day, that means there has to be water above, right? You got it in the sky. We know that, okay, well, we've got water that's constantly going through a cycle. Well, where'd it come from? And we're talking that sheer amount. That means there had to have been a lot of hydrogen and all this. If we're looking at the Big Bang, right, let's go and break that down. It doesn't make sense for it. It doesn't. End of the day, because end of the day, where did all the hydrogen and oxygen come from, right? It's got to come from everywhere. And like I said, you could break this down, and the thing is, the science doesn't really prove it. When you break it down chemically, through the, if you want to go through the field of chemistry, it doesn't make sense. If you go through the field of geology, it doesn't really make sense. On top of that, like I said, I'm not saying I don't believe necessarily in anything here. I'm just throwing this out here. There's a lot of areas when it comes to the science behind this, it doesn't make much sense. And I'm not saying I'm a scientist by any means, but I've looked at it, I've tried to wrap my head around it, and end of the day, there's all sorts of problems when it comes to the science behind the math and all this. It doesn't make sense. Like I said, that's fine. If somebody wants to, sit here and try and debunk me, I'm not trying to go and say anything, because I'm not saying, oh, I believe this or I believe that. I'm just going over these things. They don't make sense. And I'm not calling out for people to necessarily come out here and try to educate me. If you guys are interested in doing that, that's fine. Let me know in the comments down below. Maybe we can get you in on one of our next shows. I'd like to know what your background is, things like this. I'm also looking for experts for these shows. I'm not looking for somebody that just, oh, well, I know this is, I went to high school. No. I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for experts. Like I said, I'm not an expert by any means at all on this. But I have questions. I'd like to talk to experts here, and I'd also like to talk to ones that are not. I'm not saying I'm really super picky here, but end of the day, it's just I'd like to talk to somebody that is like more or less bought and paid for by the people, by propagandists, right? I'm looking for somebody that's, there's no political affiliation on this. They just, here's the science. Let's break it down. Let's look at the math. Let's look at this. That's what I'm looking for here. So like I said, don't hate me. I'm just bringing some things up, some interesting things that I'd like to go and cover. And like I said, when I get some other people coming on here, then we're going to go and discuss these things. So, but that being said, so like I said before, where did the water have to go? I mean, we have to have this water somewhere, right? Well, in the Bible, it directly says it's, there's the water above and there's the water below. Okay, so we have that right there. If you go off of what the Bible says, God unleashed the waters from above, right? So above the firmament, let the waters loose. Okay, so what ended up happening is the water just washed over the world, and it got rid of all sorts of bad people, Nephilim and giants, all sorts of other monstrosities, things that were just not clean, all that. So it went over and it did a whole lot of stuff, and it essentially gave us kind of a reset, if you will. The original Great Reset, if you will. But yes, so end of the day, with the firmament, it does make sense to some degree. Now this is the part that's it makes this make more sense, okay? So after that, if the firmament's open still, We know evaporation does exist. That's an actual science. We know that this is an actual process. So we know that it goes through that whole whole water cycle, right? So that can happen. You have enough heat and all this is gonna it's gonna just evaporate. Well, if it's open, it could just the whole firmament's open. What happens? It could just go right back up. God shuts the firmament, and all of a sudden, here's the water that's up above. And it explains why we're also not flooded now. Now, you could also say, well, there's always other option. Maybe it's soaked into the soil of down below us. Sure, very well. That's also a possibility, which would explain also why they're now finding water, vast amounts of water underneath our crust. That would also make sense. But that would also have to mean that there wasn't a whole lot of sun then during this time. This is just nothing but rainbow, so this just soaked in. But as for the timing and all this, I mean, you're looking at things that had to have been kind of more or less rushed along. The process had to have been somewhat rushed. Even for it to soak in, it had to have been rushed. 40 days or whatever I believe it was. No, that's not long enough on its own. There had to have been something else. So, do I plan on exploring this more? Absolutely. We will be exploring this more. Expect this in future episodes, especially with what other topics coming up. Next up, we have the... Oh, yes, I forgot. I do absolutely have this to go and show you guys. So, this is the map right here of all the places that I could find that have lore about the flood. If you look at this, everywhere across the United States, in North America, all the way down to, you got South America, just a little part of South America that doesn't have this lore. You got bits and pieces of Africa, you got Australia, you got big chunk of Asia, the Middle East, Israel and all this. You've got Russia and all this, and northern, like Eurasia and all that. They've got lore. Okay, so that's why this itself, just the flood by itself, is so intriguing, because almost every single country in the world has lore about this. Some of these smaller countries, some of them were newer now, right? So this could have been lore from these countries at different points had different borders. So they were much bigger at times, sometimes much smaller. In the case of Africa, that happens often. In South America, that was vastly different too. I mean, we're looking at this could have been areas where it was shrunk down. So there's just a little bit of people here who have the lore, and like the vast majority of the other land or the rest of the land did not. This happens, but overall, this is what I'd found. These are countries that have got lore about the Great Flood. So this lines up. Okay, not to mention Noah's Ark. That's another part that's also really interesting about that, is that was also, there's several documents out there and documentaries and all this that have confirmed that. And so if Noah's Ark exists, if it's on top of mountains, well, how else would it get on top of a mountain? It doesn't make sense unless there's a flood, especially based on how it looks. Everything based on the data about that, all the different drone footage, all the different documentaries, everything that covered this, it looks just like it. Look exactly as it's described. So, like I said, I'm not technically an expert or anything. I'm just sharing some stuff here, but that's a little tidbit on that I thought was really interesting. Next, we need to talk about giants and the Nephilim. Now, this ties in with the flood because the Nephilim and the giants, based in the Bible, what had been described as they were actually washed away. They were some of the evil beings that were out there. Based on the lore, the Book of Enoch describes the Watcher Angels. They're the ones that had procreated with human females and had produced these things called Nephilim, which were quote-unquote men of renown. So whatever that means, I mean, that can mean a number of different things. Are we looking at the legendary, like the heroes throughout all this folklore and mythology? Are we looking at beings like Gilgamesh, the king of Ur? Are we looking at Heracles? Are we looking at Samson? These are all sorts of different kinds of characters that we think of it like they're men of renown, right? The thing is, based on the Bible itself, it doesn't seem to be that way. Now, I do want to go and take kind of a little bit of a sidestep and discuss this a little bit further, because we also have lore about this through other religions as well. You have Greek mythology. What happens when Zeus, with all of his children, many of them were demigods. They weren't even full-fledged gods. They were demigods. Now, you had some that were just not that great, and they were just not really good at all. And you had others like Heracles, for instance, which they went on to be heroes, right? So you have stories of this where, once again, this comes back to the men of renown. So if these quote unquote these lowercase gods, right, lowercase g, were procreating with humans, right, which they also viewed as lesser, mind you. They don't fail to mention that ever. Couldn't they just be the Watchers? Could this just be another reiteration of the Watchers? Because if you look at during the time frame of when these occurrences often occurred, it was during the time what appears to be during the biblical time of when the Watchers had come down. So, that being said, these Watchers and all this, they once again, they procreated with these human females, created these Nephilim. Now these Nephilim, they were some nasty things. They ate people. They were huge, often just towering over just even the average man, just absolutely just massive. Even men like that existed